Before we begin, like the video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where are you watching from. Saigon, 1969. In a bland, air-conditioned office at MACV headquarters, an American intelligence officer pins a new red string to a vast wall map. It connects a suspected NVA way station to a known supply route. It is a hypothesis, a best guess based on signal intercepts, aerial photos, and prisoner interrogations that lasted hours, not days. The map is a tapestry of probabilities. Now shift 50 miles southeast to a sweltering, sandbagged bunker on the perimeter of the Australian base at Nui Dat. Here, a different kind of map is being drawn, not on paper, but in the mind of a 22-year-old North Vietnamese Army private named Nguyen Van Hai. He sits on an empty crate, unchained, sipping sweet, milky tea from a chipped enamel mug. Across from him, an Australian SAS sergeant smokes a cigarette, not asking questions, just waiting. The only sound is the buzz of flies and the distant thump of artillery. This quiet scene, which would look like negligence to an American MP, was in fact the opening move of one of the most successful intelligence operations of the war. The Americans collected information by the ton, processing hundreds of prisoners and thousands of intercepts. The Australians hunted for the single perfect key. This is the story of that key. Private Nguyen Van Hai, a terrified, insignificant radio operator who, through a campaign of calculated patience and psychological reversal, would unlock the entire command and control structure of the Viet Cong 5th Division in Phuoc Tuy Province. This is how one prisoner, deemed worthless by standard metrics, became the Rosetta Stone for a secret war. The divergence in approach was fundamental. The American system, immense and efficient, was built on volume and speed. Prisoners were processed through the Combined Intelligence Center in Saigon. Interrogation was a linear extraction. Apply pressure, get answers, verify against other sources, move on. The goal was tactical: reveal the location of a unit, the size of a force, the direction of a march. It was a factory farm for facts. The Australian SAS, constrained by tiny numbers and a deep-seated pragmatism, could not afford volume. They had to pursue quality. Their philosophy, honed in the patient hunts of Malaya, was that every soldier, especially a lowly one, contained fragments of a larger puzzle. The goal was not to rip the fragments out, but to get the prisoner to quietly, willingly assemble the puzzle for you. They weren't looking for a secret. They were looking for a context. Private Hai, captured in a confused firefight, was the perfect candidate. Frightened, young, and of low rank, he was written off by initial American advisors as having limited tactical value. To the SAS team, led by Sergeant Ian H. Cameron, he was a potential gold mine. Hai was a radio operator. He might not know grand strategy, but he knew call signs, transmission schedules, authentication codes, and most importantly, the specific sound of his commander's voice giving orders, a pattern as unique as a fingerprint. The interrogation began not with a question, but with a cessation of hostility. Hai was separated from the brutal chaos of his capture. He was given medical care for a minor wound, food, and left alone under guard. The first interview was not an interrogation at all. Sergeant Cameron, who had painstakingly learned conversational Vietnamese, simply asked him about his home village, his family. It was a performance of normalcy, a deliberate dismantling of the evil captor archetype. The goal was to create cognitive dissonance. This enemy did not match the propaganda. For days, the conversations continued, meandering and low pressure. Cameron shared his own rations, offered cigarettes. The unspoken message was one of shared humanity and, more crucially, shared vulnerability. They were both soldiers stuck in a terrible place. This built a fragile transactional trust. Hai, expecting torture or execution, began to see compliance as a path to survival. The intelligence started not with a bang, but with a whisper. Hai confirmed his unit designation. Then he sketched the rough location of his last camp. He described the daily routine. Each piece was given not under duress, but as a token in this strange, quiet economy of survival. Cameron's genius was in what he did next. He used each verified piece of information to build credibility. An Australian patrol would be sent to quietly observe the camp Hai described. When they reported back that his details were accurate, the guard shift change, the latrine location, Cameron would casually mention this to Hai. The effect was psychological dynamite. The prisoner realized his captors were not just listening, they were checking. He was not just giving information, he was building a record of his own truthfulness. The relationship shifted from captor to captive to a grim collaboration. The breakthrough came not about weapons or troop counts, but about sound. Cameron, knowing Hai was a radio man, asked him to mimic the sending style of his battalion commander. Hesitantly, Hai tapped out a rhythm on the table, a specific, hurried fist tap followed by two slower ones. It was the man's habitual fist, his unique style on a telegraph key. To Hai, it was a trivial detail. To the Australian Signals Intelligence Unit, it was a master key. They began monitoring the airwaves, not just for codes, but for that specific rhythmic signature. Suddenly, they could differentiate the commander's genuine orders from deceptive traffic. They could trace his movements by following his radio's transmissions. Hai, prompted by this success, then revealed the unit's secondary and emergency frequencies and the simple but effective code used for casualty reports. Now the Australians weren't just listening in, they were understanding the emotional state of the unit. A spike in coded casualty reports meant a recent engagement or a disease outbreak. The intelligence was no longer just situational, it was diagnostic. The final strategic gift came almost as an afterthought. Hai, now fully immersed in this unspoken partnership, described the personal rivalry between his battalion commander and the political officer attached to the unit. He detailed how the commander would use one set of trails for military moves and how the political officer, not trusting him, would use different, slower routes. The SAS now had a map of the enemy's internal distrust. They could predict not only where units would be, but which paths they would avoid and where fissures in their command might be exploited. The impact was operational cataclysm for the VC 5th Division. Over the next 3 months, SAS-led operations achieved a near mythical precision. Ambushes were sprung not where the enemy was, but where he was scheduled to be, based on his own transmission schedules. Resupply caches were raided hours after they were filled. The VC command structure began to unravel, paranoid that they had a high-level traitor in their ranks. The Americans, seeing the devastating accuracy of Australian operations in the province, requested briefings. They were shown summaries, but not the method. The Cameron technique was not about tools, it was about time, patience, and the psychological space to turn a prisoner from a source into a collaborator. It was intelligence as a slow, deep cultivation, in stark contrast to the industrialized harvest happening in Saigon. In Private Hai, the SAS found a cipher, and in treating him not as a locked box to be cracked, but as a teacher to be listened to, they unlocked an entire war. The story of Private Hai is a testament to a counterintuitive truth. In the fog of war, depth often trumps breadth. The Americans sought clarity by gathering more dots, more prisoners, more intercepts, more photos. The Australians sought clarity by connecting the dots they already had, no matter how few, into a perfect, revealing picture.
They understood that the most valuable intelligence isn't always a secret document or a general's confession. Sometimes it's the unguarded habit of a tired man tapping on a table, or the petty grievance between two officers. It's the human texture behind the military machine. By investing time in one insignificant prisoner, they gained a sovereign understanding of their enemy's rhythm, his fears, and his flaws. They proved that in a conflict where the enemy was an idea as much as an army, the ultimate weapon was not a more powerful transmitter, but a more profound listener. The war wasn't just won by those who gathered the most information, but by those who understood the information they gathered the best.